Owen, you must get engaged to Mandy this year. This is non-negotiable. My mother pushed open the study door and slammed a marriage alliance proposal heavily onto the desk. Her tone was unquestionable, carrying the characteristic firmness of someone in a high position. In this life, I slowly raised my head, took off my gold-rimmed glasses, calmly met my mother's eyes, and replied word by word with a few syllables, I refuse. My mother froze in place instantly, the authority in her eyes replaced in a flash by an extreme shock, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Of course, she couldn't understand my unusual behavior. Because she didn't know that just 10 minutes ago, I had just experienced a long, painful, and suffocating death. On my deathbed in my previous life, I was covered in tubes, gasping painfully from terminal cancer. And Mandy, the wife I had devoted my entire life to cherishing and spoiling, stood over me in a gorgeous custom-made haute couture gown. There was not a trace of sadness in her eyes, only undisguised disgust and the greed of a job well done. Amid the sharp, piercing alarm of the ventilator, she raised her hand and, without hesitation, personally pulled out my oxygen tube. At that moment, she leaned slightly over and whispered in my ear with an extremely cruel tone the truth that had been hidden for 20 years. Owen, do you think you're so great? The truth is, I never loved you. Do you really believe the son you've lovingly raised for 20 years is your child? How pathetic, he's Zach's. All your vast fortune, in the end, won't leave a single penny to you, it will all become ours. Your entire life has been nothing but a stepping stone for us to reach wealth and success. It wasn't until the moment before my death that I fully realized my so-called happy marriage was nothing more than an elaborate scam. The family I poured my heart and soul into protecting was a cold, venomous snake. The child I treated as my own was the product of her affair with her first love, Zach. My entire life had become nothing short of a school-wide joke. The suffocating pain still seemed to linger in my trachea, but the study before me was bathed in bright sunlight. I looked at my mother, my chest heaving violently once, before being engulfed by an endless chill. Have you lost your mind? My mother's voice shot up an octave, her sharp eyes fixed on me. Mandy has waited for you for 3 whole years. The two families just signed a multi-billion-dollar cooperation project in the Southern Development Zone last week. Owen, marriage is not a game for you to act willfully. You know the status of Mandy's family in City A. Mom, I am perfectly clear-headed. Precisely because I haven't lost my mind, this engagement absolutely cannot go through. I slowly closed my laptop, my slender fingers interlaced on the desk. My tone was utterly calm, without a trace of emotion, as if I were discussing the stock market trends for tomorrow's listing. Not only is the engagement to be called off, but all ongoing collaborations and financial transactions between us and Aurora Conglomerate will be terminated entirely from today onward. In half an hour, I will personally convene a board meeting to explain this matter to all shareholders, and I will bear all losses on my own. My voice was soft, yet carried an almost ironclad resolve. My mother looked at me, her expression shifting from shock to deep bewilderment. She knew me too well, I was the heir she had personally groomed, someone who had always been steady and mindful of the bigger picture. Unless I had an absolutely irrefutable trump card, I would never have made such a resolute, almost self-destructive business decision regarding a family alliance involving tens of billions in interests. The air in the study momentarily froze. Mother took a deep breath, her sharp gaze sweeping across my face for a long time. Finally, her tense shoulders relaxed. Are you sure you've thought this through? The liquidated damages and reputational loss we'll have to bear are no small matter. Mandy's father, Kenneth, that old fox, won't be easy to deal with. How do you plan to explain this? I stood up tall, buttoned my suit jacket, and let out a self-deprecating laugh. They don't need an explanation. What they need right now is probably a police car from the Economic Crime Investigation Division. The news of my unilateral refusal to get engaged and the suspension of all business cooperation between the two families was like a bombshell, causing a huge uproar in the high-end business circles of City A. In the evening, inside the CEO's office, the private phone on the desk began to vibrate violently, with Mandy's name flashing repeatedly on the screen. In my past life, that name was my weakness, my life, a deity I was willing to give everything to please, but in this life, in my eyes, it is nothing more than a disgusting, foul symbol. I let the phone ring until it was about to hang up automatically, then unhurriedly slid to answer, casually pressed the speakerphone button, and tossed the phone onto the desk. Owen. What exactly do you mean? Mandy's signature sharp, questioning voice suddenly erupted in the empty office, piercing the eardrums painfully. How dare you unilaterally cancel next week's engagement banquet? And you also cut off the funding chain for the Southern City project? Are you crazy? Do you know my dad had a hypertensive episode at the board meeting today because of anger? How am I supposed to save face? Exactly what I said. I leaned back in the spacious leather office chair, twirling a black pen in my right hand, my voice as cold as an ancient, unmelting glacier. Owen, don't talk to me in that tone. Mandy on the other end of the line seemed provoked by my indifference, her tone shifting seamlessly from anger to a sobbing grievance. I've been with you for 3 whole years, giving you every bit of the best years of a girl's youth without holding anything back. For you, how many sons of wealthy families did I turn down? And now you're using this way to humiliate me and trample on my dignity. Have you found another woman outside, so eager to kick me out? Owen, do you even have a conscience? Mandy, stop acting. There's no one else here, don't you find it tiring to watch? I coldly cut off her Oscar-worthy sobbing, slamming the pen in my hand heavily onto the desk with a sharp clatter. Zach came back late last night from abroad, and you were the one who picked him up at the airport, weren't you? Driving that Maserati I gave you. Did you sleep well in the executive suite 801 at the Blue Sky Hotel last night? The phone fell into a deathly silence in an instant. Mandy's violent sobbing stopped abruptly within a second, so sudden it was almost comical. Through the radio waves, I could even clearly hear her breathing suddenly become heavy and rapid. That was the physiological instinctive reaction of extreme fear and panic after a lie was exposed in public. What nonsense are you talking about? Zach. Zach is just my college classmate. He just came back from abroad and has no place to stay. As an old friend, I'm just helping him settle in. Owen, don't you dare slander me like this. Are you spying on me? She tried to raise her voice to cover up her inner weakness. I know far more than you can imagine. I let out a cold laugh, leaning forward slightly, my tone carrying a ruthless edge as the cards were laid on the table. For example, Zach's gambling debts abroad were being covered by you. And another example, last night the two of you were in bed discussing how, after marriage, you would gradually drain my core assets through several shell companies, all to prepare a generous gift for your future baby. Mandy, do I need to play the audio recording for you? Owen. You actually had me followed? How could you stoop so low? Completely stripped of her disguise, Mandy flew into a rage, screaming hysterically over the phone, no longer the gentle and dignified lady she usually pretended to be. I didn't waste another word on her. I simply pressed the end button and, with practiced ease, blocked her phone number and all her social media accounts. However, Mandy and the man behind her clearly underestimated my resolve in this life. They had no intention of stopping there. Half an hour later, I received a text message on my phone from an unfamiliar number. Every word was filled with provocation and madness. Owen, don't think that just because you were born into a wealthy family and have some dirty money, you can humiliate Mandy however you want. Let me tell you, the one she truly loves is me. In her eyes, you're nothing but a rich sucker, a tool. If you know what's good for you, you'll show up at tomorrow night's charity gala in City A, apologize to Mandy, and renew the engagement. If you have the guts, don't come, and we'll see who ends up socially dead in the end. I stared at the flickering words on the screen, a cold and cruel smile slowly curling at the corners of my mouth. Trying to use the pressure of high society's public opinion to force me to back down. Trying to play the game of moral blackmail with me. Excellent. Zach, Mandy, I was just worrying that the stage tomorrow night wouldn't be big enough. Since you've built the gallows yourselves, I'll personally see you up there. The City of A's annual top-tier charity gala was grandly held at the Ritz-Carlton's Nevernight Hall in the city center. Tonight, luxury cars lined the streets like rain, with a gathering of political and business elites, as well as media reporters. With Mandy's deliberate bribes and behind-the-scenes push, the entire social circle of City A has been buzzing with a rumor today. The recent conflict between Owen and Mandy was just a lover's quarrel, and tonight's gala will be the grand stage where the two families break the rumors of discord and officially announce their union. Dressed in a perfectly tailored pure black handmade bespoke suit, I declined any assistance company and stepped alone into the brilliantly lit venue. The moment I stepped into the hall, the previously bustling chatter around me instantly died down, and countless complex gazes focused squarely on me. There was envy, jealousy, and curiosity tinged with a sense of schadenfreude. "Owen, you finally came. I knew you wouldn't be so heartless." A soft, sweet voice rang out. Mandy, holding her father Kenneth's arm, walked toward me with a smile, like a proud peacock confident of victory. Mandy was clearly meticulously dressed tonight, wearing a floor-length white off-shoulder tulle gown from a renowned designer, her hair tied up, adorned with an expensive diamond necklace. Under the flashing lights of countless cameras, she appeared pure, noble, and captivating, like an untainted white lotus. But not far behind her in the crowd, I keenly caught sight of Zach. He was wearing a somewhat ill-fitting borrowed suit, holding a glass of red wine, and glaring at me across the void with a sinister, smug, and provocative look. Kenneth's face was glowing, as if he were not the same person who had been hospitalized in a rage a few days ago over his funding being cut off. He patted me on the shoulder with an air of condescending familiarity, then directly led Mandy towards the central podium in the venue. He tapped the microphone on the stage, and the screeching sound instantly drew the attention of the hundreds of guests present. The cameras of the media reporters all focused on the center of the stage. Distinguished colleagues in the business world, friends from the media, today, taking advantage of this charity event, I would like to borrow a few minutes from everyone to announce a piece of enormously good news. Kenneth's voice was booming, his face plastered with an insincere smile. Our Aurora conglomerate and the Veyron Group have long been the commercial titans of a city. And today, we are adding even more joy to the occasion. My only precious daughter, Mandy, and Mr. Owen, the president of the Veyron Group, have been in a 3-year romantic journey, with a bond stronger than gold. I announce that they will officially hold a grand wedding on the 8th day of next month, tying the knot. As soon as the words fell, the pre-arranged shills in the audience immediately began clapping wildly. The entire banquet hall erupted in thunderous applause, with countless praises and cheers rising and falling, forming a terrifying wave of public opinion that swept toward me from all directions. "Owen, what are you standing there for? Get up there. What a perfect match, a match made in heaven, a legendary romance in City A. Mandy looks absolutely stunning today, Owen is truly a lucky man." On stage, Mandy displayed a perfectly timed blush of shyness, lowering her head slightly. Under the gaze of the crowd, she slowly extended her right hand toward me in the audience. A flicker of barely noticeable smugness and threat flashed in her eyes. She was betting on the reputation of City A's elite, the stock price of Veyron Group, and the honor my mother had always valued, gambling that I wouldn't dare to confront her publicly. She bet that, for the sake of the bigger picture, I would, just like in my past life, walk up like a puppet, obediently take her hand, and swallow this bitter pill coated in poison. Under the gaze of countless eyes, I let out a cold sneer. Then, as the entire venue watched, I strode unhurriedly and steadily up to the podium, facing the dense barrage of flashing lights. The smugness in Mandy's eyes deepened as she leaned forward slightly, ready to receive my embrace. But I brushed right past her shoulder without a single glance. I walked straight up to the lectern and, reaching out, snatched the microphone, the symbol of speaking rights, from Kenneth's hand. I looked down at the packed crowd of eagerly waiting guests, then at the cameras, my expression as cold and hard as iron. The moment I opened my mouth, a clear and icy voice echoed through the speakers, cutting through the air like a bitter winter wind. "I'm sorry, everyone. Let me make a formal clarification here. I, Owen, and the Veyron Group behind me have absolutely no relationship with Ms. Mandy. As for the so-called upcoming wedding news next month, it is purely a self-serving delusion and shameless fabrication by Mr. Kenneth and Ms. Mandy, driven by their own interests. I find it disgusting." The entire venue instantly fell into a dead silence, so quiet that even a pin dropping could be heard. The originally frenzied flashing of camera lights abruptly paused, and everyone doubted whether they were hallucinating. Kenneth's smile instantly froze on his face. His entire complexion turned a visible shade of livid green, with veins bulging on his forehead. Lowering his voice, he roared beside them in an extremely angry and threatening tone. "Owen! Do you have any idea what you're talking about? Do you want Veyron Group stock to hit the limit down as soon as it opens tomorrow? What do you take our family for?" Beside him, Mandy's face was as pale as paper, her body swaying violently, her eyes filled with terror and disbelief. "Owen, have you lost your mind? How can you say this here?" "I haven't lost my mind, I'm perfectly clear-headed. Since Chairman Kenneth wants an explanation, let's settle the accounts once and for all." I didn't even bother to look at them, turning around and snapping my fingers at my assistant in the audience. "Everyone, please look at the big screen." The next second, the massive LED screen in the center of the banquet hall, which had been playing a charity promotional video, suddenly went black. Immediately after, a series of blushing, heavy breathing sounds came from the harsh speakers. The screen lit up, playing a high-definition surveillance video that lasted several minutes. The background of the video was all too familiar to everyone, a city's blue sky hotel. In the video, Mandy, dressed in a sexy nightgown, eagerly opened the door and threw herself at Zach, who was outside, pinning him against the corridor wall. The two kissed passionately like dry wood meeting a raging fire, their movements crude and indecent. Even their most obscene and private conversations in bed were clearly recorded by the high-definition microphone. Boom! The guests below erupted into chaos. But it didn't end there. As soon as the video finished playing, the screen was flooded with screenshots of chat logs, hotel check-in records, and Mandy's pregnancy test report from a private obstetrics and gynecology hospital in City A. In the chat logs, Mandy's name was clearly visible. "Zach, just hold on a little longer. Once I marry that fool Owen next month and get the 10% original shares of Owen Group, I'll immediately cooperate with you to short Veyron Group through an overseas account. By then, Owen's billions in assets will all belong to our baby." Zach's reply followed closely, "Clever girl. Let that Owen be a free father and a lifelong servant for our son. Once he's no longer useful, we'll get rid of him." Upon seeing this, the entire banquet hall erupted in murmurs. "Oh my God, this is just too shameless. Mandy appears innocent on the surface, but in private, she's this promiscuous. And she's even pregnant with some other man's child. This isn't a marriage alliance at all, it's outright exploitation, premeditated murder, and commercial fraud. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting." Kenneth actually had the nerve to announce his engagement on stage, shameless as ever. The public opinion, which had been overwhelmingly in Mandy's favor, took a complete 180-degree turn in the face of these nuclear-level irrefutable pieces of evidence. Countless looks of contempt, disgust, mockery, and scorn turned into countless invisible blades, mercilessly stabbing at the father and daughter on stage. Mandy stared at her own disgraceful behavior and malicious scheming on the big screen, her mind going completely blank. Her entire body trembled violently, her legs gave way, and she could no longer support her weakened frame, collapsing to the ground with a thud. The pristine white wedding dress at that moment seemed utterly ironic. Zach, seeing the situation turn dire, tried to make a run for the banquet hall door. However, the dozens of black-suited bodyguards I had arranged in advance had already blocked all exits. Two burly bodyguards strode forward, swiftly pinned Zach's arms behind his back, and slammed him onto the cold marble floor like a dead dog, shattering wine glasses everywhere. "Owen! You've ruined me. You madman. I'll haunt you even in death." Mandy screamed hysterically, her nails digging deep into the carpet, her delicate makeup completely ruined by tears and sweat. Standing at the podium, I looked down at her collapsed on the floor, my gaze cold and devoid of any human emotion. The Veyron Group legal team has officially filed a lawsuit with the A City Court half an hour ago. Aurora Conglomerate is suspected of serious commercial fraud and embezzlement in the South City project. I will terminate all cooperation and apply for the legal freezing of all assets under Aurora Conglomerate's name. I dropped the microphone, adjusted my suit amidst the frantic flashes and shutter clicks of countless media, with Kenneth clutching his chest as he collapsed and Mandy's desperate scream serving as the background soundtrack. Under the gaze of everyone, I strode off the stage without looking back. The shocking scandal at the charity gala exploded across the financial and social circles of the entire city of A in an extremely short time. With the loss of Veyron Group, its massive and sole financial backer, Aurora Conglomerate's already fragile capital chain, propped up by robbing Peter to pay Paul and sustained by false prosperity, completely collapsed within just 3 days. After seeing the evidence on the big screen, banks recalled their loans overnight. To avoid incurring Veyron Group's wrath, all partners promptly issued statements terminating their contracts with Aurora Conglomerate and demanding massive penalty payments. Aurora Conglomerate stock suffered an unprecedented 15 consecutive limit-down days, with its market value evaporating by 90%. Kenneth, who suffered a stroke and was paralyzed on one side at the banquet that night, now lies in the hospital's intensive care unit, facing property freezing orders from the court every day. Aurora Conglomerate has completely declared bankruptcy and closed down. And without the glamorous identity of a spoiled heiress and the endless flow of money, the so-called true love between Mandy and Zach soon faced the most brutal and bloody reality. To escape the overwhelming debts and the pursuit of loan sharks, Mandy had to sell all her designer bags and jewelry, and eloped with Zach overnight to a remote and backward small county in the south. A few months later, I sat in the bright and spotless president's office of Veyron Group, flipping through the periodic reports submitted by my assistant about their recent situation. Without my lavish support to fund their extravagant lifestyle, the two of them could only describe their days as a complete mess. Zach, who was already well versed in drinking, whoring, gambling, and all forms of debauchery abroad, was essentially a lazy, good-for-nothing scoundrel at heart. Back in the country, without the generous allowance Mandy used to give him, he quickly revealed his true colors. He became obsessed with underground gambling, not only losing every last bit of Mandy's remaining savings but also racking up a mountain of debt to loan sharks. Mandy, pregnant and suffering from severe swelling, was unable to work at all. She could only squeeze into a dark, damp, moldy basement in the urban-rural fringe of the county town. What greeted her every day was not Zach's gentle whispers, but his drunken abuse and relentless torment after losing at gambling. A year later, my assistant sent me a candid photo. In the picture, the woman was skin and bones, with a sallow complexion, wearing a cheap, heavily pilled pajama. She was arguing fiercely with a vendor at the vegetable market over a few cents worth of rotten greens. If not for the familiar silhouette, I would never have believed that this was the once proud top socialite of City A. The report stated that Mandy gave birth to a son. However, due to long-term malnutrition, frequent domestic violence from Zach during pregnancy, and the fact that she couldn't afford to go to a major hospital for childbirth, missing the critical window for treatment at an unlicensed clinic, the child was born with a severe congenital heart defect. The daily medical expenses were like a bottomless pit. Zach saw the child as nothing but a complete burden. One stormy night, while Mandy was fast asleep, he heartlessly snatched the remaining hospitalization money she had saved for the child and vanished without a trace, completely disappearing from the face of the earth. Once a pampered and arrogant heiress who ruled the city of A, she had now become a shrew, living with a child who could die at any moment, constantly harassed by loan sharks who blocked her door and splashed paint on her walls. In the mire they had dug for themselves, they viciously tore at and cursed each other, leaving both their bodies and souls battered beyond recognition. Yet all of this was merely the tip of the iceberg of the karma they had sown in their past lives and were now reaping in this one. While Mandy and Zach were gradually falling into a bottomless abyss, my life seemed to have pushed open a brand new door, ushering in a complete rebirth and brilliance. In the second year after rejecting the arranged marriage, I met Shirley at a national industry summit led by a ministry, focusing on the development of core materials for new energy. She was completely different from Mandy's false refinement, which was built on high-end custom-made clothes and luxury goods. Shirley was the youngest PhD in materials science at a city university and also the chief technology officer of Veritas New Energy, a prestigious name in a city. She had none of Mandy's deliberate coquettishness aimed at pleasing men. With a neat, short haircut at ear length, clear and determined eyes, and a capable demeanor, she radiated a dazzling brilliance that only a woman with true wisdom and confidence could possess. Our collaboration at work is nothing short of seamless. With Veyron Group's capital and channels, combined with the core patented technology in Shirley's hands, the two quickly achieved an unrivaled monopoly in the new energy sector. In our private lives, we share a perfect alignment of values, like kindred spirits meeting at the highest level. Every day with Shirley, I truly experienced for the first time what it means to be comrades fighting side by side, and what it means to have unreserved trust and respect. I no longer need to guess the underlying motives behind her every word, nor do I have to carefully try to please her. Owen. Look. The third-generation superconducting material we developed has broken all international records in both pressure resistance and conductivity tests. In the depths of the core lab late at night, Shirley wore a slightly oversized white lab coat, with a trace of charcoal smudge on her fair face. Clutching a data report, she was as excited as a little girl, stepping over the cables strewn across the floor and diving straight into my arms, hugging me tightly. I reached out and held the woman in my arms tightly, real, passionate, and full of vitality. Feeling her heartbeat and warmth, I knew that the ice formed in my chest from the betrayal and death of my past life had, at this moment, completely melted away. 6 months later, on a private island in the Aegean Sea, we held a low-key, warm, yet utterly romantic wedding. Without the intrusion of the media, the exchange of interests in the business world, or the scheming and deceit of ulterior motives. Amidst the sky full of rose petals and the glow of the setting sun, there were only the purest and most sincere blessings from the families and friends of both sides. In the second year of our marriage, Shirley gave birth to a healthy and beautiful daughter. When the nanny carefully placed that soft, rosy-skinned daughter, who was sucking her fingers with her eyes closed, into my arms, my eyes, having weathered the cycles of life and death and grown as hard as iron, became thoroughly moist for the first time. This is my flesh and blood, the crystallization of the love between me and my beloved, and even more so, a bright testimony of my upright and honorable life, walking openly under the sun in this world. Through the powerful alliance of Veyron Group and Veritas New Energy, Veyron Group's market value tripled in just a few years, propelling it into an unshakable trillion-dollar industry giant in the country. My life is bathed in warm sunshine every single day. As for those maggots rotting in the dark mire, if they hadn't jumped out to court death on their own, I would have almost completely forgotten that two such people even existed in this world. Time flies like an arrow. A few years later, in the dead of winter, City A was hit by the rarest blizzard in nearly a decade. Heavy snowflakes swept across the entire city, blanketing the outside world in a silvery white. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the Veyron Group building, in the president's office, the underfloor heating was fully on, making it as warm as spring. I had just finished a 4-hour cross-border video board meeting and walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window with a cup of hot coffee in hand. Just then, the intercom on my office desk rang abruptly. When I answered, the receptionist's voice sounded hesitant and uneasy. "Sir. I'm sorry to disturb you. There's a woman downstairs in the building, with a child who looks very ill. She's been kneeling in the snow for 2 hours. The security guard tried to drive her away, and she started banging her head against the stone pillar frantically. She says her name is Mandy, and she says, if she can't see you, she'll die with her child right in front of the main entrance today." My hand holding the coffee paused slightly. I looked out at the wind and snow outside the window, a cruel smile curling at the corner of my mouth. "Let her come up. Take her to the reception room." I gave the order coldly. Some karmic debts from the past life, since she insisted on walking right into my hands, I didn't mind personally putting an end to them. 5 minutes later, the heavy door of the reception room swung open. A faint scent, a mix of cheap perfume and medicine, instantly rushed toward me. Mandy was standing in the middle of the room. No, to be precise, she was hunched over, kneeling on the floor. The once glamorous, high-fashion addicted heiress who captivated City A now wore a tattered, long-down jacket so dirty that its original color was unrecognizable, and her feet were clad in cheap snow boots with gaping holes. Her face, once meticulously maintained with countless expensive cosmetic procedures, was now covered in rough windburn, frostbite, and large, shocking patches of purple-black bruises. Her frame was hunched, and she cradled a child as thin as a kitten in her arms, making her look like a 70-year-old crone. The moment Mandy saw me, a nearly manic glimmer burst from her once dull, numb eyes. With a thud, she crawled forward on her knees a few steps, then slammed her forehead heavily onto the hard floor, producing a dull, thumping sound. Owen! Owen! I'm begging you. Please, save this child. She was crying hysterically, tears and snot streaming down her face, and her forehead was instantly bruised and bleeding. I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the leather sofa across from me, sat down gracefully, crossed my legs, and took a sip of my coffee. Owen, I know I was wrong back then. I truly know I was wrong. Seeing that I remained silent, Mandy cried even more miserably, trying to reach out and grab my pant leg, but I coldly pulled my foot away. Zach is a beast. He's not even human. He does drugs, he gambles, he owes millions in loan shark debt, and every time he gets drunk, he whips me with his belt and burns me with his cigarettes. Look at my arms, look. She frantically tore at her sleeves, revealing a dense patchwork of old and new cigarette burns and bruises. He took away the only money that could save my child and ran away. Owen, only you can save us. All the mistakes are mine, but the child is innocent. If you're willing to take out $500,000 for the child's surgery, I'll be your servant. I can be your mistress, your maid, without any title, serving you for life. That beast Zach was right, the one I truly love has always been you. I was blind back then. Listening to her absurd, shameless plea, I couldn't help but lean back on the sofa and let out a low laugh. The laughter was filled with deep sarcasm and disgust. Mandy, what makes you think I'd give up my good life to pick up the leftovers of a drug dealer, a gambler, and a piece of trash? And raise some other man's bastard on top of that? I reached out and pressed the smart control panel on my desk. The massive projection screen came crashing down, immediately displaying a live surveillance feed. In the picture, inside the warm sunroom of the estate, Shirley, dressed in a beige sweater and exuding elegance, gently holds our daughter. The mother and daughter in the frame are beaming with radiant smiles. See? This is my wife, my daughter. I have a complete, happy, and honorable family, and I love my wife deeply. I coldly looked down at Mandy, who was collapsed on the floor, my gaze like that of someone watching a dying stray dog. You and your bastard, whether you live or die, what does it have to do with me? What right do you have to stand here and negotiate with me? You. Owen. How can you be so heartless? He's just a child. He's a human life too. Where has all your kindness from back then gone? Seeing her last glimmer of hope vanish, Mandy's pleading instantly turned into desperate madness as she screamed curses from the ground. Cruel. I slowly stood up, walked over to her, and looked down, crushing her dignity from above. Leaning in, I whispered softly in her ear, in a voice only the two of us could hear. Mandy, back then in the hospital, when you personally pulled the oxygen tube from my ventilator, did you ever think about the word cruel? When you and Zach were plotting to kill me and take everything I had, did it ever cross your mind that I was also a human life? Mandy jerked her head up, her bloodshot pupils contracting sharply in an instant. She stared at me, her eyes filled with boundless terror and trembling. Of course, she couldn't understand the secret of my past life hidden in my words, but at that moment, the overwhelming hatred and tangible murderous aura emanating from me, as if crawling out from the depths of hell, made her soul tremble violently. Her mouth hung open, but she couldn't utter a single syllable, collapsing completely onto the floor. Security, throw this filthy thing out. From now on, if I ever see her within a kilometer of the group's headquarters, all of you can pack your bags and get the hell out. I disgustedly pulled a wet tissue from the table, wiped my fingers, and didn't even spare her another glance. Behind me, Mandy's desperate cries and fading screams as the bodyguards dragged her away were completely cut off by the heavy soundproof door. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and casually tossed the damp tissue I had used to wipe my hands into the trash can. Outside, the raging blizzard continued to wreak havoc, the biting wind mercilessly devouring everything in its path, just like the inevitable fall into the abyss that awaited those two, with no chance of survival. The phone on the table vibrated slightly, the screen lighting up with a short video sent by Shirley. In the video, my daughter was giggling at the camera, babbling, "Daddy," indistinctly, while Shirley gently corrected her beside her, warmth radiating from her eyes and brows. I stared at the screen, the frost in my eyes melting away in an instant, replaced by boundless tenderness. The blood feuds of the past life have been fully settled and buried in today's blinding snowstorm. I closed my phone and turned to walk into the inner chamber. There, warm light awaited, along with my beloved wife and the righteous life I now lead. When the snow stops falling, dawn will break.